Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I actually don't know if the video started working right away. This is my latest video, and I'm very happy that it's coming out much sooner after the last one than what happened with the previous few videos. I'm just having to make sure that the stream is actually working, and yes. And in contrast to the last stream, I also have the live chat open. I know I'm probably still gonna be alone, but the last video did actually a little better than I thought. So I'm trying to keep the streak going. I'm very sorry for this kind of content almost because that's not what I want to make, but in some ways it's also very fun to make. And this is the discussion about the M2 iPad Pro. But just like it was with the M2 MacBook Air, this isn't really a discussion about the product. It's a discussion about the content that is created about this product, or just to put it more general, the media reaction. And with media, I more precisely mean YouTubers, because YouTubers are usually the ones creating the most hot takes kind of content, while written media is a little more laid back. That's just the nature of how modern content creation works. And I've been kind of flabbergasted by the intensity of the negative reaction towards the M2 iPad Pro. This is why I really wanted to talk about it, even if it's just briefly. So it's not gonna be a 40-minute video, at least I hope not. I hope that even I cannot rant this long about such a topic. And I don't want to call out any individual YouTubers, so this is just a small overview of what I'm talking about, right? Like Max Tech has pointed out that Apple's 2022 iPad lineup is confusing, so they made a buyer's guide, which is actually a good thing. Then they've had videos like Pick Stupidity about the iPad 10, and I'm not gonna comment on the iPad 10 anymore because I've done so in my coverage on the September event or press release, where I've ranted more than enough about the stupidity of the Apple Pencil first gen integration with the iPad 10, but otherwise it's actually kind of a good device. And yeah, then we have like Luke Miani saying Apple's new 2022 iPads are trash, kind of again pointing to the Lightning first gen Apple Pencil working with a USB-C iPad. But all of those videos are talking about all iPads. At least that's what's in their thumbnails, and that's sort of to a degree what is also in the actual videos. I've watched all of them, so I'm not taking them just by their thumbnails. Like Telos of Tech, who I actually really like, is saying don't buy the new iPads. The main criticism against the M2 iPad Pro is actually not that it's fundamentally a bad product. It doesn't have anything as stupid as the Apple Pencil first gen situation on the 10th gen iPad, the cheap iPad. But part of what makes it so unappealing to those YouTubers is the existence of the M1 iPad Pro. And this is actually why I would like to go to the compare page on Apple's website. So we have the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and then we can compare it to the 5th gen version, which is the M1 version, and then let's compare it also to the 4th gen version, which is the A12Z iPad Pro, right? So, and just like the last video, I'm trying to stay hydrated, so I'm actually gonna try to open my cola. I'm really sorry, guys. It's in the middle of the night. I'm gonna fall asleep if I don't do it now. Yeah. Sorry for the loud noises. So, let's get into it. I have the chat open if anybody decides to join. I'm here. Last time somebody actually commented during it, so but this time I didn't give you much time to prepare on Twitter, so if I'm just alone for now, that's also okay. So, what are the YouTubers saying why they hate, dislike, or in general don't recommend the M2 iPad Pro? Well, it's the existence of this one, the M1 iPad Pro. Right? They have very, very similar tech. They have the same displays. They have the same cameras, basically, except for a couple of software features. They have the same Face ID technology, the same Apple Pencil and Magic Keyboard support. So, why would I use the M2 iPad Pro for a sort of a defense rant, right? If the M1 is almost as good, but it's cheaper. Well, the point is that you can say that about almost every kind of product launch nowadays. Even back a decade ago, Apple had MacBook announcements that had like a new Intel chip inside and maybe a new Wi-Fi chip and maybe slightly better Bluetooth, right? And it was the same price as before and it was the same storage as before, but it was advertised as a better deal because it's the, at least in Apple's words, the best device in its product or size category, just getting even better. So, what does this guys remind you of? And to me, that's exactly what is now happening with the iPads, with a more mature product category. The third gen iPad Pro was the very big redesign, right? That's when we got our more rectangular body. That's when we got the A12X chip, which was a big step forward. And the upgrade to the M1 chip was actually kind of big, but that's because we had a gap in between with the A12Z. So the third gen iPad Pro came out in late 2018, and then the fourth gen iPad Pro came out in around summer 2020, and then the M1 iPad Pro came out a year later, right? So that's actually more than a 2.5 year gap between the A12X version and the M1 version. Of course, you're gonna get more improvements from that generation to the M1 than what are going to get from the M1 iPad Pro to the M2 version. That's because we don't even have a full 18 months between those devices. And that's kind of where I get a little annoyed because look, um, the M1 iPad got a little like better front camera, even though I would argue that like the ultra wide front camera actually has more downsides. It got Thunderbolt, it got 5G versus 4G. Um, so it was quite a nice update, and of course it got more RAM, it got the faster chip in general, but otherwise it was just a nice device that obviously on the 12.9-inch version got the pro display XDR, I was going to say, but it got the Retina XDR display, which is Apple's most advanced mini LED screen, so it's great. But that kind of step was never going to be repeated after just a year. Like, those expectations are absolutely stupid, and a redesign also wasn't gonna come this year if Apple is planning much larger changes like early 2024, maybe with like an OLED screen, maybe with like a repositioned camera, maybe with some kind of MagSafe technology. Really sorry, I got myself a little flustered and I promised I wouldn't do that. But yeah, my point here isn't that any kind of complaint about the M2 iPad Pro is fully unjustified, but this idea that, oh, the M1 iPad Pro, you can now get it refurbished, or now you can get it on clearance. That always is the case. That's what we heard when the M1 iPad Pro came out, and then people were recommending get the A12X or the A12Z version unless you really want the XDR display. Right? People were saying at that point that 5G is useless. They were saying that the extra performance of the M1 chip is useless. They were saying that the ultra wide front camera is a gimmick. Kind of agree with that, but people loved it at first and changed their opinion on it later. Right? It's a different kind of feature, right? At least we can agree on that. And it's sort of like where I don't know what to tell people because you cannot always insist that by last gen tech it will be just fine, it will be just as long supported. First of all, it won't. Like, just logically thinking, you would believe that Apple would differentiate M2 iPads from M1 iPads at least through 1 year longer software support, right? um, Third-party software, right? The new M2 is like 15% CPU faster. Okay, that's not a big deal. 35% more GPU power. That's certainly something when we have games like No Man's Sky coming out for the iPad Pro. We have faster AI, which most of the system is now handling, like it's actually using it. And channels, even like MaxTech, who were saying that, like, oh, my Bluetooth 5.3 devices, like my iPhone 14, work so much better with the new AirPods. Well, guess what? The M2 iPad Pro has Bluetooth 5.3, and the M1 iPad does not. It has Bluetooth 5. And when we just go into general Wi-Fi, the sixth generation, the M2 iPad Pro, now gets Wi-Fi 6E. Like, again, it's not about any kind of big step, right? But it's all of those things coming together. It also has a new 5G modem, right? Some people have complained that it has less LTE bands than the previous one, but that actually kind of implies that it has a newer modem, because LTE was such a confusing mess in the beginning that the industry created a ton of bands, a ton of substandards that, like, even when you just look at it with like HSPA, HSPA Plus, and dual carrier HSDPA, right? Those were all technologies designed to make LTE better when there wasn't really one coherent way to like reach 100 megabits or per second, or even like a gigabit. And so now that we have more advanced 5G technology, which also includes millimeter wave, at least in the US, I actually don't think, I think it's the same as with the iPhone. I think that iPads outside the US don't get millimeter wave. So you get less bands for LTE because more and more bands are getting depreciated for 5G's sake, and all those older, more confusing standards are consolidated into newer standards for 5G, not anymore for 4G. So that was kind of my mini rant. There was a lot of confusion about the networking of this device, because Apple doesn't mention 6 gigahertz specifically for Wi-Fi 6E. But if you do any kind of read up, there is no Wi-Fi 6E without 6 gigahertz. What the reason why Apple is mentioning 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, from what I understand, is because those are the fallback technologies, and those are the technologies that support simultaneous dual band. I still will leave it up to Apple to clarify anything about this, but just them advertising that it supports 2.4 gigabits per second, that just points to it using a much newer Wi-Fi modem, and that points to it using a 6 gigahertz modem. That's just how it works. I don't know why Apple doesn't actually write it down like they would usually do, but maybe they thought it was so self-evident that if you're typing in 6E, that it automatically means you're using 6 gigahertz. They're also not advertising different top speeds for the 5G. They are advertising double the top speed for Wi-Fi, but for 5G, I would assume it's either using an X60 or even an X65 modem from the latest iPhones, which would definitely also contribute to like better efficiency when you're on the go and stuff. But this is neither here nor there, right? I'm not telling you to upgrade from an M1 iPad to an M2 iPad because it's slightly faster and because it has better networking, right? Or because it has like that one trick with like the hovering Apple Pencil, or because it supports ProRes for the video capturing. Like, this is actually where I would criticize Apple a little bit, right? When we go to like video recording, it has ProRes video at 4K at 30 or 1080p at 30 for the lowest storage version. Like, it has such ancient camera hardware that I honestly just, like, ProRes ain't changing that much about it. Like, the encoder was never the problem for the technology that it's being used there. But hey, at least for like, if you're taking photos, it's also using smart HDR4. So who knows if it's gotten a little better, right? It's always better than before. You can also argue that like newer neural engines will always improve features, even like microphones for like better denoising, but Apple isn't specifically listing that, so I'm not actually advertising it here either. Yeah, so you see, there isn't that much new stuff, and some people, and that has been a discussion between me and Vadim from MaxTech, were talking whether or not the third gen, like whether the upgrade to the A12Z from the A12X was bigger than it is now. And I would argue definitely was not, right? It had 6 gigs of RAM versus 4, but only when you ignore the DA12X version actually had 6 gigabytes on the 1 terabyte version. It had an extra ultra wide camera, and that is completely baffling to me why Apple still insists on integrating it like a true depth camera on the back. Um, it supported the same accessories because the Magic Keyboard actually launched alongside it. It had the same display. Right, it's and obviously the chip difference was like it went from a 7 core GPU to an 8 core GPU. So it was the same architecture, the same node, the same everything. Like it had the same USB-C connector, and what it did, I believe it like small changes to the camera, obviously, and then we had like some networking stuff. Like where does the networking always go, right? The fourth generation iPad Pro had Wi-Fi 6. So it has a similar update over the third gen in terms of networking that the sixth gen iPad does over the M1 version. It has better networking. Um, for basically across Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And in this case, the new iPad is also better in terms of Bluetooth over its predecessor. So those are very similar updates, but again, I would argue that the A12Z version actually came at a bad time. It came at a time when it was really a good opportunity to introduce 5G, but it still relied on 4G. It came at a good time to actually introduce a slightly newer processor because M1 launched just a couple of months after its introduction. But no, it had literally the same processor, not even like an A13 based one. Like, this is where it's kind of infuriating to me because we have had similar small scale updates even in the iPad lineup, especially in the MacBook lineup, which is a far more mature product category. And we now even have those kind of updates in the iPhone, right? The iPhone 14 over the iPhone 13 or over the iPhone 12. You could argue those are very similar upgrades. Newer chip, sometimes not a newer chip, newer networking, and then because for iPhones, cameras also more important, that's when you also get a newer camera. But then again, iPhones are also disproportionately more expensive, at least to their physical size. Like on iPads, the camera matters far less. So yeah, of course, and we're gonna go back to the M1 version here. And yes, like of course, if you can get an M1 iPad Pro on absolute clearance, which will be like 300 or 400 bucks cheaper than the M2 version, do it, right? If you really don't need any of those new things. But if you're buying them at like a $200 price difference, I would argue get the M2 version. It will last longer, it will perform better, like even like newer apps, right? We are also talking beyond just the raw performance of the chip. We are also talking better memory throughput, which will matter more in more demanding titles and apps. We have a new ProRes encode and decode engine, which isn't just used for video capturing, but it's also used now in promised apps like DaVinci Resolve. And stuff like Oak10X, the rendering app, will benefit from the uptick in GPU performance and especially memory bandwidth. Anybody who's using those kinds of apps on a Mac knows it, especially if you're slightly memory constrained, which you will be likely on 8 and 16 gigs of RAM devices. It's always good to have any kind of extra resources you can get. The battery life is the same, you get the same Thunderbolt capability. I would say the only thing that is somewhat disappointing about this iPad upgrade, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying really not to get worked up, but it was just like the ferocity of the content against it was so intense that I was like a little surprised. So if I may be a little critical about it, right, it's the fact that the 11-inch version did not get a mini LED screen. I think it deserved it, but as Ross Young has said, mini LED supply is very much in short supply right now. So Apple is kind of reserving it to their 13-inch displays and up, especially because they also might be planning to introducing like a Pro Display XDR successor, or maybe something in between a studio display and the Pro Display that will be mini LED and ProMotion and all of those technologies that now the iPad has had and the MacBooks Pro are having. Yeah, so again, the criticism isn't that, yeah, if you're gonna make a value oriented suggestion to people, I would say, yes, look if you can get an M1 version for much cheaper. But if not, then just get the newer one, get the best one, especially in the US where the iPad has stayed the same price, right? Here in Europe, the price has gone up. I'm not going to be angry with you if you're really starting to look for deals here, because the euro has been kind of trash recently. So, yeah, with inflation, with the currency loss against the dollar, it's really worth it to save a few bucks where you can. But even like consider if you have like a third gen iPad Pro, right? And you bought a Magic Keyboard with it. It's kind of like for all of those of you who also build PCs, for example, like if you have an older AMD chip, but you have a motherboard that is still compatible with newer chips, you don't have to buy like new memory and new storage necessarily. What you just do, you take out the old chip, put in the new, and it works perfectly fine. And for example, with this iPad Pro, I would argue that if you bought a third gen iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil and then you bought maybe a Magic Keyboard a year later, if you plug and play the 6th gen iPad onto those accessories, then you have a device that now lasts you an extra 5 years without the need for extra accessories. So where are some other criticisms coming from? And those have primarily to do with the regular iPad, now the new 10th gen iPad. And the 10th gen iPad has two things that are different, which some people want now from the Pro and are complaining why it didn't get it. And part of it is simply because the Pro already had some of those things, or it does something better, so it cannot implement those things. Now, what am I talking about? The first is this accessory, the Magic Keyboard Folio. Now, I love the Magic Keyboard Folio. I think it's a great design. I think it's very similar to the Logitech accessories, the one that I chose over the Magic Keyboard for my M1 iPad Pro. So I can fully understand why somebody wants it. But realistically, if you look at it, it does not give you much of an advantage over a Magic Keyboard, especially not if you already have one. It's not some kind of magical device. Like, yes, it is a two-part accessory, so you can take off the keyboard part but still use the back protection part with the angle kickstand adjustment. That's great, but that's not what the Magic Keyboard was about. The Magic Keyboard was about its cool like hovering feature. In comparison to this, it also has backlight keys. It also comes in black and white, so at least in that it's wildly superior for anybody who wants the black version. And just in general, I would also say that it's kind of more appropriate, I would say, as a production accessory, right? And it gives you a better touch screen use through the hovering mechanism. But eventually, I do see Apple maybe introducing a similar accessory to the Pros. However, without changing the design, this was not going to happen. And in a year like this, a redesign for the iPad Pro definitely wasn't going to happen. So I'm just trying to get expectations straight, because the iPad Pro is without a doubt the most advanced tablet in the industry. There is basically zero competition to it. Like, you could argue like, oh, Samsung's tabs have like OLED screens, which are usually half as bright in terms of peak brightness, and they have processors that are two generations behind, sometimes three. Let's be honest, when you even compare against the A12X chip, like, and just in terms of popularity, you're also not going to compare it, because the iPad has found its niche for basically every single iPad in the lineup. It is not really competing against Android tablets anymore. Like, people who want something better than the iPad or more productive, they will go for a laptop, whether it be a Mac or a Windows one, or at least they will go for a Surface Pro, where you can get like a full-fledged desktop operating system. And yeah, like, the iPad is cool, right? I can see why some would want, especially this thing. Man, like, so it all goes by so quick, right? The camera in landscape mode. Why doesn't the iPad Pro have the landscape camera of the 10th gen iPad? Like, how often have I read those comments? How often have I seen that commented in videos, right? Like, I just wanted to pull my hair out, and my hair isn't what it used to be when I was 15, and I had like hair to spare for a bear, as I would say. Um, let me be perfectly clear. Yes, a landscape camera is cool, and yes, the iPad has always looked a little weird in video conferences because it doesn't have it. However, have you forgotten this atrocity? Have you forgotten that because it has a landscape camera, it has no Apple Pencil 2 support? Because where usually you would have the magnetic attachment to the Apple Pencil 2, you now have a camera where you would have the charging thing for the M2 for the Apple Pencil. You now have the camera. Yes, you could argue that there are different design ways to implement it. Like, you could still have the camera slightly offset, or you could have a new Apple Pencil, right? Like, still one that attaches magnetically, but maybe it attaches like left and right instead of center. I will leave it to Apple and now their new design head, because Apple's Johnny Ive replacement recently quit. So let's see what happens now. Um, but that will have to wait until early 2024. That's what I'm absolutely convinced of. That's when we are getting one of the biggest iPad redesign changes ever. I don't actually think it's as much of a redesign, but a change to an OLED screen, like an M3 processor, like those will be quite big things for the iPad. Even though then people will argue, why does the iPad Pro need an M3 chip if the M2 chip was already too fast? And then we will have this discussion over and over again, and then people will say, just get the M2 iPad Pro because it's now in clearance and so much cheaper. And then we will have this discussion in perpetuity. So this is kind of my counter argument, right? The Magic Keyboard Folio is for a redesigned iPad, because the new base iPad actually repositions its smart connector back to underneath, not on the back, where it needs to be to work with the hovering design of the Magic Keyboard. And it cannot have what the 10th gen iPad has in terms of camera, unless it greatly redesigns how it connects to the Apple Pencil, or it shifts around enough components that you might as well redesign the entire internals, which was not going to happen because I also believe that the next iPad Pro will also come with another price increase. Like, I wouldn't put it past Apple to charge a full grand for the 11-inch version next time with an OLED screen and maybe 256 gigabytes standard, and then maybe the 12.9-inch iPad Pro will be $14.99 at its starting point. I wouldn't put it past Apple to do that. So anybody who's like saying like, oh, Apple should have changed that, and that, like, I wonder if those people would actually be willing to pay up for it, especially with how dismissive many of them have been recently towards the entire iPad form factor and the usability. And as somebody who uses both a MacBook Pro and an iPad Pro, I completely disagree with that. I think there are great reasons to use either for very different use cases. And sometimes if you're just in the mood for the perfect form factor for reading, you choose the iPad. Sometimes if you want a wider screen just for video watching, you switch to the Mac. And then obviously the Mac also has more performance. The iPad has the Apple Pencil. You have the different app support. So I love the fact that those product categories are not being merged, right? That iconic no from Craig at WWDC still stands and in my opinion deserves to. However, if you actually disagree with that stance, there's also the rumor that the M2 iPad Pro might exclusively get a mini version of macOS down the line. So if you're complaining that the M1 is a bad deal, that the M2 is a bad deal, then that will make it the best deal ever, right? If it suddenly turns into a Mac. Oh my god, I got so flustered. Again, MaxTech, Luke, Teloseph, this isn't me attacking you, right? I don't hate you or anything. I really, really like a lot of your content, especially Teloseph Tech for like his skits and MaxTech for their camera comparison. And Luke does some great like buyer's guide / buying older tech and looking how it works. So but I think you wildly overreacted to this one. I think you took some of the anger against the stupidity of the 10th gen iPad, which includes the Apple Pencil and the fact that like the Magic Keyboard Folio looks like a cool accessory but doesn't migrate to other categories. So why is that? And you took it out on the entire product, right? You didn't say like, oh, it's a good product, but I wish it had like this accessory. No, it suddenly became like, oh, this product is completely worthless because it doesn't do this, and that. Especially for you video editors, right? It will have DaVinci Resolve with ProRes video encode and decode blocks. This thing might match the performance and video editing of my M1 Max MacBook Pro. You should be excited for those kind of changes. Just because it's not Final Cut Pro doesn't mean it's not a pro app. Oh gosh, I'm not trying to stir some beef. This isn't like the Linus Tech Tips video where I was legitimately kind of pissed off at the idea of a Mac channel that they are now leaving out basically to die. It has no concurrent content to what is going on, right? I like some like fake beef, but not real one. And when I try criticizing somebody for real, then I want it to be taken for real. So in this case, don't take it as criticism against all your content, just for this one. And just for the future, consider that like older tech, cheaper, therefore better, is something that you can always say. Like I've seen people say that with like the Series 7 and the Series 8, right? And there I kind of agreed because there are basically only two features. With like the Series 8, which is like crash detection and like the temperature sensing. But then again, if you actually want to have those features, why not get the latest and hope that it will at some day help you, or at least it's better to have some of those features than not eventually. So that was kind of my defense rant for the M2 iPad Pro. The defense rant, something that I will have to give some credit for actually to Teloseph Tech. It was a very old kind of content he did. I think he actually recently did something to defend Apple. But this isn't a defense of Apple itself, right? I have criticized plenty about the new iPad lineup. I think it's a little too disjointed. I have not as much a problem with the size of the overall lineup, but more with how certain subcategories intersect. I personally would have preferred just to make the iPad Air like $50 cheaper, which at this point, like at five, or just give it more storage, and it would have been enough of a better deal. So you don't have to redesign an entire new iPad and price it at like 450, and then it still doesn't have an M1 chip, so it still won't support Stage Manager, right? So and then you have to create all this nonsense with the Apple Pencil adapters. I see where Apple is going forward, where this design they will make it cheaper in the future, right? There are things that help it, like the non-laminated screen, the cheaper Magic Keyboard Folio, all things that will especially make a nicer push in the education market. But again, those criticisms don't apply to the M2 iPad Pro. Don't confuse your hatred, or at least your confusion about why the 10th gen iPad is the way it is, with the M2 iPad Pro, which is just a better version of an iPad Pro that we already had, which was a much better version of an iPad Pro that we already had, which was a better version of an iPad Pro that we already had, and so far on and so forth, right? As the more mature a product category becomes, the less each individual upgrade will make sense for a gen to gen upgrade. But again, if you have the A12X iPad with 8 gigs of RAM, maybe you don't have enough storage anymore, you're looking for a better screen, just take your Magic Keyboard, take your Apple Pencil, plug in the M2 version, and suddenly you have 5G, Wi-Fi 6E, the latest encoders. If you're doing some video editing, get like a higher configuration with better storage and more RAM, and suddenly you have another device that will easily last you 4 to 5 to 8 years if you need to, without even buying new accessories. But that is just my opinion, and again, I'm not trying to stir up some beef, I'm just trying to give my own viewpoint, and that was exactly why this channel was created, right? I'm nearing the 40-minute mark, which I promised I wouldn't do, so I'm trying to wrap it up now. But this channel exists, and if you're taking one thing from this video, then please take this, that I want to create an alternative viewpoint whenever it is needed. I'm not going to be a contrarian for being a contrarian's sake. However, I will speak my mind. I will not make flashy headlines of how stupid something is. Again, like, I've criticized the 10th gen iPad to death, but I can also say very easily, just get a Logitech Crayon with it, save some extra money, and suddenly you actually have a fantastic tablet at that price point, right? So that's also, I'm somebody who is a really big advocate, just get the best thing you can inside the Apple ecosystem, because Apple's lower end devices usually are compromised in ways that the competition isn't. But that's a discussion for another time. So I hope that you will appreciate this kind of viewpoint in the future, not because you want me to fight other YouTubers, not because you want me to defend Apple when they're doing something indefensible, but that you will want to hear from me when I honestly, and I hope intellectually honestly, have something to tell you that I believe the rest of the content creators club is not addressing, or they're addressing it in a very wrong way, in my opinion at least. So I hope you will give me your support. I hope you will keep watching. The last video actually did kind of decently. Again, I know 60 views isn't like big, but for 4 days, for a channel that you cannot even find if you type in the name in the YouTube search right away, you have to scroll quite a lot. I think it's doing quite good, and I actually haven't been as bombastic on Twitter as I usually am when it comes to recommending my latest videos, just one pinned tweet. So share it with somebody if you like. Maybe take it as kind of like buyer's guide with what I said. Like, if the M1 iPad Pro is much cheaper, get that. If you believe you can use those features, get the M2 version. Or just if the price gap is small enough, maybe you have all the appropriate accessories and you have a really great place where you can hand down your iPad Pro to your kid or to somebody older in your family or to a friend who will pay you a little bit. Do that, right? That's what I basically do with all my devices. Or find a really good buyer. If like your old iPad still has good resale value, take advantage of that while it still lasts. But don't get swept up in the negativity, especially some of the like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, like the negativity that really is unwarranted. Especially in the US, where you're not paying a cent extra in a country with an 8% inflation rate, 8.7, and you're getting a better device with objectively more expensive components, right? Wi-Fi 6E is actually much more expensive than Wi-Fi 6 was. Um, the M2 chip is bigger than the M1 chip while being based on a slightly newer node, so it's going to be more expensive. It's using LPDDR5 versus LPDDR4X. Again, memory has actually gotten much more expensive over the last couple of years, and your tech memory is much more expensive nowadays. So while those are maybe are cents and dollars when you consider it inside the iPad, when you consider it against inflation, suddenly you're getting an objectively better device for the same kind of money. So yeah, that is just why I just would say, don't get all flustered like I did. Don't get all angry. Buy what is best for you and try to stay positive. Like, even a rant like this, it's fundamentally still rooted in positivity. It's all about the fact that we can all find something to enjoy. We can all find places to save some money or just to get the best of the best whenever possible. Sometimes we wait and wait for something better and it never arrives. And some of you will wait until like 2024 to get like an OLED iPad, especially if you want a better 11-inch iPad, and that's okay too. I'm certain I will make videos about either rumors for that device, or who knows, if I'm still in the business in 1.5 years, I will gladly be reviewing that iPad at that point. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you subscribe, share, comment. I really appreciate constructive criticism. I know I was a little short of breath. I'm not quite feeling myself, and it's very late. So, oh yeah, I'm actually seeing Big Dog is commenting iPad Pro M2 is the beast for faster charging also. Wow, I haven't actually seen that. It will be interesting to see how that reviews, because Apple is still shipping the 20-watt charging adapter. So who knows? And he already pre-ordered his M2 iPad Pro. I have actually seen a ton of Twitter comments that said we have pre-ordered it. They've pre-ordered it. So I greatly love to see that a lot of people are actually agreeing with me and are saying to those people, look, I'm not upgrading from the M1 version. I'm not upgrading from the A12Z version. Why are you making it look like I'm having to compare it to a one-year device? Like, iPads are kept for like 5, 6, 7 years, like sometimes twice as long, 3 times longer than the iPhone. So I don't see why this kind of backlash exists when a gen-to-gen upgrade isn't as big. Fundamentally, what matters is progress over time. But now I am fully over time, and I'm glad that I still got somebody to comment. So I will just quickly say, appreciate the comment. Right. So thank you very much. Hopefully it will be even more of you, or the same people will join earlier next time. I will try to give a warning tweet much sooner than before. Especially than today, but this was more of an impromptu video that I really had some passion for.